It was a typical day at the airport, bustling with travelers, the hum of conversations, and the endless shuffle of luggage. The airport had always been a place of movement and excitement, but today felt different. Among the crowd, there was a man standing out in his sharp suit, confidence radiating from every step he took. His name was Marcus, a wealthy businessman known for his success and undeniable presence. Life had always been kind to Marcus, providing him with the luxuries many only dreamed of. His world had always been one of wealth, power, and control. But little did he know, his encounter at the airport would unravel a story that would challenge everything he thought he knew. As Marcus strolled through the terminal, his eyes caught something that seemed oddly familiar but out of place. There, by the departure gate, stood an elderly woman, her posture frail but her gaze steady. She was alone, clutching a worn-out suitcase that looked like it had traveled more miles than she had. Her weathered face bore the marks of a life well lived, and there was a quiet dignity about her that made it impossible to look away. Something about her caught Marcus's attention, pulling him in against his will. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story than met the eye. Unable to resist, Marcus decided to approach her. "Excuse me, ma'am," he began gently, his voice softer than usual. "Can I help you with something? You seem lost." The woman turned to him, her eyes meeting his with a calmness that belied the storm of curiosity brewing within him. "Thank you, young man," she said in a voice that carried a hint of both wisdom and weariness. "I'm just waiting for my flight. It's been a long journey." There was something about her words, something about her presence, that made Marcus feel drawn to her. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it was as if their meeting was not just a coincidence. After a few moments of silence, Marcus couldn't hold back the questions that were forming in his mind. "You seem familiar, ma'am. Have we met before?" The woman gave him a faint smile, her eyes twinkling with a quiet secret. "No, young man. We've never met. But perhaps we're destined to meet now." Marcus felt a strange mix of intrigue and unease. What was it about this woman that felt so significant? She wasn't like anyone he'd ever encountered. There was a quiet mystery that seemed to surround her. Before he could ponder further, her gaze turned serious, as if she were weighing her next words carefully. "You're a successful man, aren't you?" she asked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and wisdom. Marcus nodded, a little surprised by how easily she had seen through him. "Yes, I am," he admitted. "And you've done well for yourself. I've seen your face on billboards and heard your name on the news." Marcus chuckled softly, his confidence unwavering. "You seem to know a lot about me, but I don't even know your name." The woman hesitated for a moment, her expression becoming contemplative. "Names don't matter much when we're trying to understand the essence of who we are," she said gently. "But for now, let's just say I'm someone who's seen more of life than you can imagine." Marcus raised an eyebrow. There was something about her enigmatic answers that only deepened his curiosity. The more he tried to unravel the mystery, the more elusive it became. As they continued to talk, Marcus couldn't ignore the feeling that the woman wasn't simply an ordinary passenger. There was a grace and wisdom in her that didn't seem like it belonged to someone from his world. But what truly left him intrigued was the hint of something else beneath her quiet demeanor, something that felt both familiar and distant. Time passed as they spoke. The airport noise faded into the background, leaving just the two of them immersed in conversation. They talked about life, success, and the paths they had chosen. Marcus shared stories of his journey, of the sacrifices he had made to achieve his goals, and of the world he had built around him. The woman listened, her expressions thoughtful but never intrusive. At times she would nod in understanding, while at others, her silence spoke volumes. It wasn't until she mentioned the importance of resilience that Marcus truly started to listen. Life isn't about how much you have, she said quietly. It's about what you're willing to give and what you learn when you lose it all. Her words hit him like a sudden wave, making him pause. For the first time, Marcus saw beyond his success and began questioning the meaning behind it all. Just as he was about to respond, the woman's demeanor shifted subtly. Her eyes grew distant, and her voice dropped to a whisper. There's something about you, Marcus, something that you've yet to discover. A part of your story that you've ignored for too long. Her words hung in the air, leaving Marcus both intrigued and uncertain. Before he could ask any further questions, she spoke again, this time in a softer tone. You've always built walls, haven't you? Keeping people out, focusing on your own world. But what if I told you there's a world beyond that? Her gaze lingered on him, and in that moment, Marcus felt an unsettling sense of vulnerability he couldn't shake. Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement calling for the woman's flight. As she stood to leave, Marcus felt a pang of regret. Wait, I still have so many questions, he said, his voice urgent. But the woman simply smiled, her eyes holding a quiet promise. Some questions are better left unanswered, Marcus. The answers will come when you're ready. With that, she turned and walked away, her suitcase rolling behind her. Marcus watched her until she disappeared into the crowd, his mind racing with unanswered questions. Who was she? Why had their meeting felt so significant? And most of all, what did she mean by a world beyond his own? As he stood there, lost in thought, Marcus realized that his encounter with the mysterious woman at the airport had only just begun. Little did he know, her story was far from over. Marcus stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching the crowd slowly reclaim the space the woman had just occupied. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Who was she? What did she mean by a world beyond his own? These questions swirled in his head, each one more confounding than the last. The woman had spoken as if she knew things about him that he didn't even understand himself. It was as though she had looked into his very soul and found parts of him he had long since buried beneath the surface of his carefully constructed life. The more Marcus tried to make sense of their conversation, the more the pieces seemed to slip through his fingers. His world had always been defined by success, by the endless pursuit of more, the need to build something bigger, better, and more impressive than before. But now, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something far deeper, far more essential that he had overlooked. What was this world beyond his own? And how could someone like her see it so clearly, while he remained blind to it? Days passed, but the encounter at the airport refused to fade. Marcus found himself constantly thinking about the woman, replaying their conversation over and over again in his mind. It wasn't just the mysterious nature of her identity that haunted him. It was the sense of unease that had settled within him. There was something unsettling about the way she spoke, something that suggested she had lived a life far beyond his understanding. She wasn't just an ordinary traveler. There was a depth to her, a hidden story that Marcus was desperate to unravel. His curiosity soon became an obsession. Marcus began digging into any leads he could find. He scoured social media, searching for any mention of a woman matching her description, but came up empty. It was as if she had vanished without a trace. Desperate for answers, he even reached out to the airport staff, asking if anyone had seen her or knew who she might be. But all his efforts were met with dead ends. The more Marcus chased after answers, the more elusive they became. Then out of nowhere, a letter arrived. It was handwritten and addressed to him. No return address, no explanation. The letter was short but profound. Asterisk Marcus, I hope you've had time to reflect on our meeting. The world beyond your own is not as far as you might think. Perhaps you'll find the answers you seek, but only if you're willing to let go of the life you've built. Until we meet again. Asterisk. The note sent a chill down his spine. There was something about the letter. The familiar yet unfamiliar handwriting, the mysterious tone, that made it impossible to ignore. It was as though the woman had somehow reached out to him, even though she was nowhere to be found. Marcus kept the letter with him at all times, unable to put it down. It wasn't just the content that gripped him, but the feeling that someone was still watching, waiting for him to take the next step. That unsettling notion clung to him like a shadow. Every sound, every unfamiliar face seemed to hold a hint of her presence. One night, unable to sleep, Marcus found himself wandering through his empty penthouse. The city lights stretched out below him, their glow a constant reminder of his success. But beneath the surface of his affluent life, something was stirring, a sense of emptiness he couldn't quite define. For the first time, the glossy sheen of his achievements began to feel hollow. It wasn't just about the material wealth or the power. It was about the void he hadn't noticed until now. As the night wore on, Marcus began to reflect on the woman's words. Was there truly a world beyond his own? Could the life he had built be masking something far greater, something he had ignored for far too long? He knew the answer wasn't going to be easy, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't ignore it any longer. The next day, Marcus took the letter with him wherever he went. It had become his only link to the woman, his only connection to the mystery that consumed him. He found himself questioning everything, his choices, his relationships, even his sense of self. The more he thought about the woman, the more he began to see the cracks in his own carefully constructed reality. It wasn't long before Marcus started withdrawing from his usual routine. He canceled meetings, declined invitations, and began spending more time alone. His friends and colleagues noticed the change, but none of them could understand what had happened. Marcus couldn't even explain it himself. The woman's words had planted seeds of doubt in his mind, and they refused to be uprooted. One evening, Marcus sat in his apartment, staring at the letter in his hands. The woman had mentioned meeting again, but how could he find someone who seemed to have disappeared without a trace? The answer eluded him, but a part of him knew he couldn't sit back and do nothing. There was something about her, something about their encounter that felt unfinished, as if their story was far from over. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, Marcus began to take steps he never thought possible. He started reaching out to anyone who might have known her, friends, acquaintances, even strangers. His search became relentless, consuming every waking moment. He knew that if he was ever going to find the answers he sought, he had to dig deeper than he had ever dared before. But with each passing day, the mystery only deepened. The more Marcus searched, the more elusive the answers became. The woman had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers of a life he couldn't comprehend. And as Marcus continued his search, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was chasing something that might never truly be found. Whatever awaited him at the end of this journey, Marcus knew one thing for certain. The encounter at the airport had only just begun to reveal its layers. And until he could unravel the truth, the unsettling questions would remain, haunting him, driving him, and leading him into a world beyond his own. Marcus's search became an obsession. Everywhere he looked, he found fragments of a story that didn't quite fit. The more he dug, the more he realized how little he truly knew about the woman at the airport. It wasn't just about finding her, it was about understanding the world she spoke of. A world beyond his own, a life he hadn't realized he was missing. The more Marcus tried to unravel the mystery, the more he questioned his own life, his choices, and the path he had always believed was certain. In the quiet hours of the night, Marcus often found himself wondering if this pursuit was worth it. Was he simply chasing a figment of his imagination, or was there really something to uncover? His friends had long since stopped trying to understand his obsession. They saw the man who once had everything: wealth, success, control, becoming someone they didn't recognize. Marcus was no longer the confident businessman they had known. Instead, he was a man consumed by doubt, searching for answers to questions he couldn't fully grasp. As the weeks turned into months, Marcus found himself isolating more and more. The world he had once thrived in now felt like a distant memory. His once bustling social life was reduced to solitary walks and restless nights spent staring at the ceiling. He couldn't shake the feeling that the woman had left him a trail, but the closer he got to discovering it, the more the trail seemed to vanish, leading him further into uncertainty. He reached out to distant relatives, hoping someone could fill in the gaps. The deeper he dug, the more he uncovered the complexities of his family's history. Secrets, old stories, and figures that had long since faded into obscurity. It was a journey that unearthed more questions than answers. One particular discovery stood out: a distant cousin who had been rumored to have disappeared without a trace decades ago. The family had always spoken in whispers about her, a figure whose existence was shrouded in mystery. No one had known where she had gone or what had happened to her. Could this be the woman Marcus had encountered at the airport? Was she somehow tied to this forgotten chapter of his family's past? As Marcus delved deeper, he began to notice eerie coincidences. Dreams haunted him, dreams of the woman's face, and of places he couldn't recognize. The more he searched, the more he felt a connection to memories that didn't belong to him. It was as if his family's past had been waiting for him to awaken to it. But what did it all mean? Frustration mounted as Marcus realized that every step forward only led him into more confusion. The closer he got to the answers, the more the pieces of the puzzle seemed to scatter. The threads of his life, once tightly woven, were now unraveling, leaving him with a sense of vulnerability he had never known. It wasn't just his personal life that was affected. His business was suffering too. The focus and drive that had once propelled him to the top now seemed distant and foreign. His employees noticed the change, his indecision, his lack of direction, and it started to affect the company. Marcus had built his empire on certainty, but now he found himself floundering in uncertainty. One afternoon, as he stared out the window of his office, he realized that his search had become more than just a quest for answers. It had become a quest for identity. The woman's words, "a world beyond your own," echoed in his mind, forcing him to confront the life he had built. Was everything he had worked for truly his own, or had he been living in the shadows of others' expectations? In the midst of this turmoil, Marcus's relationship with those closest to him began to fracture. His friends couldn't understand his obsession, and his family, though supportive, remained puzzled by his newfound pursuit. His once steady world was now a landscape of doubt, and Marcus was beginning to wonder if he would ever find his way back. But deep down, he knew that returning to the life he had once known wasn't an option. The woman had opened a door he couldn't shut, leading him into a realm of questions without answers. The more he searched, the more he realized the answers weren't out there, but inside him. And as much as he longed to escape the uncertainty, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was destined to face it head-on. One night, alone in his apartment, Marcus held the letter tightly in his hands. The woman's words echoed in his mind. "The answers will come when you're ready." Was he ready, or was he forever trapped in the maze of questions with no way out? The only certainty he had now was the uncertainty itself. As he stared at the letter, the faint sound of distant footsteps echoed from down the hallway. Marcus's breath caught. He stood frozen, unsure whether it was his imagination or something far more real. The air in the room grew heavier, and his heart pounded in his chest. Could the woman somehow still be watching him? Was she the one behind these strange occurrences, guiding him toward answers he wasn't sure he even wanted? The night deepened, and Marcus remained at the threshold of a journey he hadn't begun to understand. The conflict, his search for identity, the unraveling of his life, and the mysteries that lay ahead, was far from over. And as the darkness enveloped him, one question remained. What was waiting beyond the door he couldn't seem to unlock? Marcus sat in the dim light, the weight of the unanswered questions pressing down on him. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint sound of his own breath. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. The letter in his hands felt heavier than it had before, as though it held more than just words, as if it carried a truth he wasn't ready to confront. The nights had become a battleground of doubt and uncertainty. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of shadow, seemed to hint at something just beyond his reach. Marcus couldn't escape the feeling that the answers he sought were closer than ever, yet still out of grasp. He had spent so long chasing clues that the idea of letting go now felt impossible. But the questions remained. Why had she reached out? And why had she vanished without a trace? The woman's words continued to haunt him. The world beyond your own is not as far as you might think. They had started to feel more like a prophecy than a simple statement. Marcus began to wonder if he was being drawn into a story that had been set in motion long before he had even met her. Could her absence be more than just a coincidence? Was she a key to a part of his life he had never truly known? One evening, Marcus found himself standing on his balcony. The city lights stretched out before him like a tapestry of possibilities. He felt a strange pull, as if something, or someone, was drawing him toward the edge of his understanding. The woman had spoken of a world beyond his own, but what did that even mean? What if it wasn't just a metaphor? What if there was a place, a reality, that existed just out of sight, waiting for him to discover it? The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Marcus had always been a man of logic, a man who thrived on control. But now control seemed like an illusion. The more he tried to hold on to it, the more he felt it slipping through his fingers. The life he had built was no longer enough. He could feel the walls closing in, the boundaries of his world becoming less defined. Late one night, unable to sleep, Marcus found himself wandering the city streets. The quiet streets, once familiar, now seemed foreign. Every corner, every shadow, felt like it was hiding something. Something he couldn't quite see but knew was there. It was as if the city itself was concealing a truth that was connected to the woman and her mysterious world. As he walked, Marcus noticed something unusual, a sense of déjà vu that wasn't quite his own. Memories flickered in and out of his mind, memories of places he had never been, faces he couldn't quite recognize. It was as though the city had become a portal, blurring the lines between reality and the unknown. Desperate for answers, Marcus began retracing his steps. He returned to the airport, the place where it had all begun. The terminal was quiet now, the bustling crowds long gone. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The air felt charged, as though the presence of something, or someone, was still lingering. It was then that he saw her again. She was there, standing by the same gate where they had first met. Her presence was as serene and mysterious as it had been that day. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as he approached her, unsure of what he would find. "Why did you come back?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I thought you were gone." The woman turned to him, her eyes calm and knowing. "Because you were ready to find me," she replied softly. The world beyond your own isn't something you can run from, Marcus. It's already a part of you. Marcus stared at her, his mind racing. The woman had always been a puzzle, but now she felt like a key. The key to a truth he had been avoiding his entire life. The world beyond his own wasn't just a metaphor. It was real, waiting to be uncovered, and Marcus could no longer deny its existence. But what would he find on the other side? And more importantly, would he be able to let go of the life he had always known to step into it? The answers were no closer than they had ever been. But one thing was certain. Marcus's journey was far from over. Marcus stood there, frozen, staring at the woman. Her presence was both familiar and otherworldly. The answers he had been chasing seemed just within reach, but at the same time, more elusive than ever. The city that once felt like his home now felt like a maze. A labyrinth of shadows and secrets. And now, in front of him, stood the key to unlocking it all. "I don't understand," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What world are you talking about?" The woman stepped closer, her expression calm and composed. "It's not a world you can touch, Marcus. It's a part of you waiting to be awakened." Marcus felt a shiver run down his spine. The notion of stepping into something he didn't fully comprehend was terrifying. His entire life had been built on certainty, on control. And now, here he was, faced with a choice. A choice that would either shatter everything he knew or open the door to something far greater. But before he could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed through the terminal. Marcus spun around, his heart racing. A group of figures emerged from the shadows, their faces hidden beneath hoods. They moved with purpose, their gaze locked on the woman. "Who are they?" Marcus demanded, his voice trembling. "What do they want?" The woman didn't flinch. "They're the guardians of this world. They've been watching, waiting. And now they've come to ensure you don't step any further." Marcus took a step back, his mind racing. The stakes had just become much higher. The world he had thought was his own was no longer the same. The woman had hinted at a hidden reality, one that now seemed closer than ever. But these figures, they weren't part of his world. They were something else entirely. The hooded figures moved closer, their movements fluid and deliberate. Marcus felt a wave of fear course through him. They weren't ordinary people. They radiated an otherworldly energy that seemed to distort the very air around them. "You can't escape," one of them spoke, their voice echoing in the empty terminal. "This world belongs to us, and anyone who seeks what lies beyond will face the consequences." Marcus's mind was in turmoil. The woman had spoken of a world beyond his own, but these figures, they seemed to guard it with a ruthless intensity. What were they protecting? And why were they so determined to keep him from finding out? The woman stepped forward, her gaze steady. "They fear what you might discover, Marcus. They fear the truth. But it's not theirs to control. It belongs to you." Marcus felt a surge of determination. The woman had been his guide, his only connection to this world beyond. But now, with these figures closing in, he knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. The stakes had never been higher. He couldn't go back to the life he had before. Not now. The unknown was no longer something he could run from. It was something he had to confront. The hooded figures drew closer, their presence growing stronger, their energy seeping into the very fabric of the terminal. Marcus clenched his fists, ready to face whatever came next. The world beyond his own wasn't a distant dream anymore. It was a reality, and he was about to cross into it, whether the Guardians liked it or not. As the tension reached its peak, Marcus knew one thing. The answers he sought were just beyond his reach. And the journey was only beginning. The tension in the terminal had reached a fever pitch. The hooded figures were now just steps away from Marcus, their silent advance creating an oppressive stillness that hung heavily in the air. Marcus could feel the weight of their gaze, their presence oppressive and unrelenting. Yet, despite the fear that clawed at him, he refused to back down. The woman stood calmly between him and the approaching figures, her eyes meeting Marcus's, unwavering. "They fear what you're about to awaken, Marcus," she said softly. "But they don't understand. You already have the key." Marcus clenched his fists, his heart pounding in his chest. The woman's words resonated deep within him. Something had shifted, not just in the terminal, but in himself. For the first time, he felt a spark of certainty amidst the chaos. The answers he had spent months searching for weren't something to be hunted. They were already within him. One of the figures raised a hand, its presence growing more intense, the air vibrating with an unseen force. "Leave this place now, or be consumed by what you seek," the voice echoed. Marcus felt the weight of their threat, but instead of fear, a surge of determination filled him. He turned to the woman. "What is it they're protecting? Why are they so afraid of what I'm supposed to find?" The woman's expression softened, a trace of sadness in her eyes. "Because what you seek isn't just about understanding the world beyond. It's about understanding yourself." With those words, Marcus felt his grip tighten around the letter he had carried for so long. The truth wasn't something he had to chase anymore. It had always been within him. The mysterious woman, the figures closing in, even his doubts. They had all led him to this moment of revelation. "You're not just searching for answers, Marcus," the woman continued. "You're searching for who you truly are. The world beyond your own isn't a place you can enter. It's a part of you that you've always ignored." As the woman spoke, something shifted within Marcus. The fear that had gripped him began to fade, replaced by an unfamiliar sense of clarity. He wasn't alone in this fight. The woman had been guiding him all along, even when he didn't realize it. Suddenly, one of the hooded figures lunged forward, their presence overwhelming. Marcus felt the air around him grow thick, but instead of retreating, he stepped forward, his voice steady. "I won't run anymore," he declared. "You've kept the truth from me, but I won't let you control it." The figure paused, its gaze locking onto Marcus. For the first time, there was a flicker of hesitation in their movements. The woman beside him held out a hand, and Marcus took it without hesitation. Together, they stepped forward, their connection stronger than ever. In that moment, Marcus didn't feel alone. The woman had become more than a stranger. She was his guide, his ally. And as they stood united, the terminal seemed to shift, not just in space, but in time. The air itself felt lighter, as though the barriers between reality and the unknown had started to dissolve. The hooded figures hesitated, their energy wavering. The world seemed to pause as if holding its breath. Marcus and the woman stood together, their connection stronger than before. "You can't stop what's already been set in motion," Marcus said, his voice calm but resolute. "I've seen through your lies. I know who I am now." With those words, the figures began to fade, their energy dissipating into the air. The terminal, once filled with tension, became quiet once more. Marcus turned to the woman, his heart still racing, but a newfound peace settling over him. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "For everything." The woman smiled, her gaze gentle. "You didn't need me, Marcus. You only needed to trust yourself." As the last traces of the figures vanished, Marcus felt the weight of the letter lift from his hands. The woman had been right. The truth wasn't something he could chase. It was already a part of him. In that quiet moment, Marcus knew his journey wasn't over, but he was ready. The world beyond his own wasn't something to fear. It was a discovery of who he had always been. And as the terminal returned to its emptiness, Marcus took a deep breath, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The terminal was still, but Marcus felt different. The fear and uncertainty that had once consumed him had shifted, replaced by a quiet sense of clarity. The woman who had guided him, who had been a source of both mystery and revelation, stood beside him, her presence a reassuring force. They didn't speak for a while, simply absorbing the stillness that had returned. The city outside hummed quietly, as though waiting for them to make their next move. Marcus glanced down at the letter he still held, its significance now fully realized. It wasn't a map to a hidden world. It was a map to himself. "You don't have to carry that anymore," the woman said softly, gesturing toward the letter. Marcus looked at her, his grip loosening. For the first time, the weight of it didn't feel as heavy. He released it, letting it drift to the floor. It didn't matter anymore. The answers he had sought were never meant to be confined to a piece of paper. They were inside him all along. "I feel like I've woken up," Marcus confessed. "Like I've been asleep, and now everything makes sense in a way it didn't before." The woman nodded. "That's what happens when you stop chasing answers and start living with them." Marcus realized that his journey wasn't about finding a destination, but about embracing the journey itself. The world beyond wasn't some distant place to be uncovered. It was something he had to learn to accept and navigate within himself. He turned to her, the woman who had become more than a stranger, who had become a part of his story. "Why did you come into my life?" he asked. She smiled, her gaze gentle. "Because you were ready to see things differently. And sometimes all it takes is one moment, one person, to open your eyes." Their connection had transformed from something distant and unknown to something real and enduring. Marcus felt a newfound sense of peace, one he hadn't expected but welcomed. In the days that followed, Marcus began to rebuild his life. The once chaotic world of his business and personal struggles began to find balance. His friends noticed the change in him, the confidence that had returned, the clarity in his decisions. His company, though different, began to thrive again, but not in the same way. Marcus wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was someone who understood the importance of purpose and self-discovery. He stayed connected with the woman, though not in a way he had imagined. She wasn't just a guide from some distant world. She had become a part of his life, someone who shared his journey. They spoke often, reflecting on the lessons they had both learned. And slowly, Marcus realized that the woman wasn't the key to unlocking some hidden truth. She was a mirror reflecting his own growth. One evening, as they walked along a quiet street, Marcus turned to her. "What happens now?" he asked. She looked at him, her expression calm. "Now you live." Marcus smiled, the weight of expectation lifted from his shoulders. There were no more hidden worlds, no more mysteries to unravel. The world beyond was no longer something distant. It was woven into his everyday life. And with that realization, he felt free. As they continued their walk, Marcus took in the quiet city around him, the streets that once felt overwhelming now feeling familiar. He understood now that life wasn't about finding answers, but about living with the questions, embracing the uncertainty, and finding peace in the journey. The woman glanced at him one last time, her smile filled with warmth. "It's not the end, Marcus," she said. "It's just the beginning." And with that, they continued their walk into the unknown, leaving behind the fears and doubts that once held them back. The story had ended, but the journey had just begun.